Okay, well, hopefully we're live.
Hello, everyone.
We'll see. We never know when these things start. We click the button to go live, and it turns out we were live like 10 seconds earlier. So
I think it picks up a little bit of the pre-buffer when you start streaming.
it's like a DVR.
That's right.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear us okay?
It starts broadcasting us before we started broadcasting. It's like time travel.
Can you see us? Can you hear us?
Are we here? Are we real?
Drop a note in the comments if you can see and hear us. Hey, there we are. Hi, Iggy. How you doing? And hello to Steve, Kirk, John, TR. Hi, everybody.
Hope everyone had a wonderful holiday.
Yeah, we're just a couple of minutes before 6, so we'll hang for just a couple of minutes and give everybody a chance to get on. Oh, good. I'm glad.
Good.
Thanks,
We're
TR.
not too loud, not too soft.
Let us know if we're yelling too loud, if we got the gain on the mic up too high.
Yeah, we can always turn it down a little if we're blowing your speakers out. I always picture people on the other end of this with their hair blowing back like we're too loud.
Hey, the Lions are here. Hi, how are you?
Hi, guys.
Welcome. So good to have you all here. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas, if you celebrate Christmas, and if not, a nice Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever else. And now that New Year's is coming, we can all say Happy New Year.
That's right. That's right.
So
you can't believe 2019 is almost here already. Like,
it's unbelievable.
how did 2018 slip away so fast?
So we are coming to you from a special spot here. As a matter of fact, we'll wait till just one more minute till exactly 6 o'clock to
We're very punctual.
show you where we are. I say 6 o'clock because we are on Mountain Time, and I'm looking at our computer clock. So we did a little shot. Those of you who follow us on Instagram have an idea where we are. We haven't been public about it. Actually, I think we did mention it here on Patreon, didn't we? That we were in Kofa. But on
It's our first time actually in Kofa.
we drove in, but we didn't stay.
We drove in once on a different access point that was way rougher than this, and we were like, "Oh, we're not going to Kofa."
Yeah. So why don't we go ahead? It's just a few seconds of. Why don't you go ahead and show that scene before we get officially started here? This is a shot we took day before yesterday, right here on the site we are currently on. And we are right on the edge. The site.
Dispersed camping.
Right. We're in BLM land right now.
Just outside of Kofa, technically.
Yeah, the scene you're seeing right now, looking into those mountains, that is the Kofa National Wildlife Refuge. And we are just outside the border. This is called King Road.
King Road, correct.
Kind of about 20 or 30 miles south of Quartzsite. So this is what we're dealing with. Terrible conditions.
It's horrible. We open the windows.
You can see we're in short sleeve shirts. We thought about putting long sleeve shirts on for any of you up north, so we didn't make you feel bad.
But then we would have been sweating too much, so we opted to stay seasonally appropriate for where we are.
It would have been too hot in here. So it's just coming up. I see it's just
after
past
6.
the hour. So let's get started here momentarily. I see more people are coming in. We're going to kind of start off a little differently today. Thank you, Jim.
Hamilton is in the room. We are allowed to
Jim
start.
says we can begin. Jim, you're getting the look here at the Kofa National Wildlife Refuge where we are at the moment. And if you look behind us, the only reason we have the curtains all drawn is because we didn't want the lights that are in front of us glaring out through the windshield and scaring all the wildlife.
We don't want our neighbors sitting here thinking that we're just wasting power.
Yeah, there are no neighbors, though. As a matter of fact, what you're seeing in this scene right now, that's exactly how many people are around us now. We are alone. So we're going to be talking today a little bit about things related to boondocking, because we're going to be talking about batteries, which is, after all about boondocking. So before we jump into your questions, we're going to go to a little presentation we put together about batteries and the difference between them. So why don't you jump out of this scene before everybody gets even more jealous? You may recall that, excuse me, that we installed this Xantrex Freedom eGen battery this past year.
And we participated in the install, since we didn't actually do all the hard work, as you can see right there.
Right. And there are a lot of questions we had, and you'll see tonight when we get to the questions, there were quite a few about this battery. So we thought we'd show it here. And Jim, you're right. We have great signal to stream from here. One of the reasons we came here is everyone raved on Campendium.
Yeah, we're basically right across the street from a Verizon cell phone tower, and there's so few people right here that we've got it all to ourselves. So the bandwidth is great.
So we're going to talk a little bit about batteries before we get to your questions. And one of the main things to talk about is why people get these batteries in the first place and what they're all about. And you can go back out of this scene there because I'm going to be talking and you won't be able to hear it. Before we talk about the benefits of the batteries, let's just talk for a second about why you might want or not want batteries like this. So the first question people ask is often the wrong one, in our opinion. They're like, what should I get to be the highest end I can possibly be on my rig? I want lithium batteries. I want solar panels out the wazoo. And
they haven't even determined yet whether or not they're going to do any dry camping or boondocking and even need all those systems. So oftentimes people seem to get caught up in the hype of wanting to have all of the accoutrement without really knowing whether or not they're even going to need it.
So if you're someone who doesn't particularly like to dry camp, but you have a nice rig and you think you should equip it with the latest gear, maybe lithium batteries or even AGM batteries or solar panels are maybe not for you, because we do know people who go from full hookup to full hookup, and we even know one couple that runs their generator in between full hookups. And I'm not kidding. No. They are frightened when they disconnect the power and immediately run the generator.
And we get it, because obviously dealing with batteries and all of the systems, understanding 12 volt versus 110 and dealing with the inverter, it can get confusing, and it's certainly an awful lot easier to just push that button and start the generator up and not have to think about it.
Or plug in.
Right. So that's fine. That's, it's why they make vanilla and chocolate, right?
So let's preface everything we're going to say here tonight and all we're going to be talking about together, that not everybody needs a high-end battery or solar bank. It depends on what you like to do. Now, as you just saw in the scene where we showed where we are, we like to dry camp. And that's not just boondocking, by the way. You can dry camp in lots of places where you're in a campground. So, for example, a national forest campground. It's a perfect example. They almost never have hookups of any kind, but you're in a campground, in a campsite that you paid to be in, but you are not connected to power.
Right, any services.
So even if you don't go out in the boondocks, true boondocking,
BLM,
you may still want higher end systems. But if you typically go from RV park, to RV park and you're fully hooked up, you don't need to even inquire about spending the money necessarily. Right. Although maybe some of what we'll talk about tonight will inspire you to give dry camping or boondocking a try.
That's right.
So let's get into a couple of things here. And first, I just want to say a quick hello to Bill and David and welcome them. Bill is here from chilly Loveland, Colorado, and David is probably a little warmer down in Orlando.
Just a tad.
So let's talk a little bit about the house and chassis batteries and what they're all about. So these batteries you're seeing now are our Lifeline AGM house batteries that we replaced with the lithium battery. And just to the left of those is a set of AGM chassis batteries that replaced our flooded lead-acid chassis batteries.
They were standard maintenance-free style, starting batteries.
And this gives you a baseline for where we are. Now, a lot of people have said, well, wait a minute. Why did you take these AGMs and replace them with lithium, but then replace the lead-acid batteries with AGMs? If you want to get rid of AGMs, why wouldn't you just get rid of AGMs? Well, without going into too much detail about that, one of the benefits of getting rid of flooded lead-acid batteries is no outgassing. And we did not want outgassing, so we replaced our chassis batteries with AGMs, which is those on the left there. So take a look at the next slide here. This is our system now, the way it's set up. That is our Xantrex eGen, a Freedom eGen battery on the right. That is 600 amp hours of lithium. And the ones on the left are two AGM chassis batteries, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the difference, the chassis batteries start the engine and run the chassis equipment, and the house batteries run the lights and the water pump and
ceiling fans and the inverter.
Any appliances that you run off your inverter. So let's take a quick look at the different battery types. Again, before we get into your questions, we're just going to kind of give you an overview of some of the pros and cons. So, different battery types. Let's break them down to the basic ones. There we go. John's going to get this running here. There we go. So,
it's not behaving.
Let's do a quick comparison, since the topic of tonight's discussion was flooded versus lithium versus AGM. Let's talk about what they are and make sure everybody's on the same page about what these batteries do. So flooded are
standard lead acid batteries with the caps on them, and you have to water them, and they're pretty much the typical battery you would see.
Typically in an RV, you're either going to have one or two 12-volt batteries, like a travel trailer might have a single 12-volt battery. But a rig like we have, the most common thing is to see a bank of at least 4 in series parallel, and what they do is use deep cycle golf cart batteries that are designed, deep cycle means they're designed to be taken down and brought back up over and over and over again, as opposed to a start battery, which is designed to stay fully charged. So we have, in this rig, came with the typical bank of 4 golf cart batteries, 6-volt, flooded lead acid. It's the pretty standard thing.
Right.
And so we upgraded to AGM. We had 7 years or so of flooded lead acid.
Yep.
Followed by 7 years of AGM. AGM, by the way, stands for absorbed glass mat.
Right. And basically the difference is that the electrolyte, the liquid, is actually absorbed into a matting material, and it's more contained, and they actually have a little bit less of that acid. They typically call them acid starved, and that sort of leads to some of the benefits of why AGMs have some of the perks that they do, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
And lithium, we're actually talking about lithium iron phosphate. We're not talking about lithium ion. A lot of people are worried about, they've heard about thermal runaway and things like that, or fires on Boeing 787s. We're talking about something that's typically called LifePo or LifePo 4. And that's the kind of batteries that are used. So let's take a quick look and compare the specs and see what you get when you have these different types of batteries. So, amp hours. We had a 440 amp hour battery bank when we bought this rig. Very typical.
Yeah, exactly. We started with Interstates. That was what Newmar installed standard. But a lot of people also have Trojans. The T105s or the T125s are very popular standard size batteries with typically about 220 amp hours per battery.
6-volt, 220 amp hours. So when you combine them into a battery bank of 4 in series parallel, what you get is the equivalent of 2 large 12-volt batteries with a total of 440 amp hours. So we replaced that.
Right. Switching to AGMs, we upgraded to Lifeline. We had the same amp hour capacity in the battery bank.
Right. Now,
440.
Everything we talk about with lithium here particularly is kind of an estimate. Lithium is new enough to the market still that there aren't the same standards about, you're going to have your typical battery be the same size necessarily or the same output, the same capacity. Right now, it's not uncommon to have 100 amp hour lithium batteries and sometimes 125.
Right.
So if you put 4 of those together, you're going to have either a 400 amp hour or a 500 amp hour battery bank. Now, in our case, in the same footprint, approximately, we have 600 amp hours. So we used 500 for this example as to how to compare these.
Sure.
So now, here's the big difference. That seems like, well, you're not getting much more from lithium, right? Well, the next thing to compare is the maximum depth of discharge and how far down you can take them before you would damage the battery.
Right.
So
depth of discharge being if you use up, like in this case, the flooded lead acid batteries, and their longest lifespan is if you keep them above 50% depth of discharge. So that means you can only use half of their usable amp hour capacity. If you exceed that, you start cutting into their lifespan. They start to sulfate, and that sulfation is very hard to get back off the plates, and it ends up reducing the battery's ability to generate electricity.
So you have poorer performance and shorter lifespan.
Now, AGMs are the same. They're listed also as 50%. They're a little bit more forgiving if you were to exceed the 50% depth of discharge, but even so, they will over time sulfate as well. So you have that same limitation of only being able to use half of the capacity that you're paying for.
Now, lithium, we put 80% here. Now, actually, that number is not hard and fast, and our batteries are 90% dischargeable. We can take our 600 amp hour battery bank down to only 10%, which means we have 540, the equivalent of 540 usable amp hours.
Right.
So
that takes us to our next.
Takes us to what you get next. Sorry, I jumped ahead there.
Is usable amp hours. So again, if you start with a 440 amp hour battery bank, but you can only use 50% of it without significantly damaging your lifespan, that means you really only have 220 amp hours of usable. With a lithium system, being able to, at a minimum, use 80% of the capacity of the battery, it means right off the bat, you have 400 amp hours. You have almost twice as much power available to you as you do from the flooded lead acid or the AGMs.
Right. When you first look at these numbers, you'd say, oh, well, I'm only getting 60 amp hours extra. Well, you're not at all. You're coming close to doubling it in this case. And in our case, we have taken the same footprint that used to have 220 usable amp hours. And because we have a 600 amp hour battery with a 90% discharge ability, we have 540. Basically, our footprint of 4 of the flooded or AGM batteries, we have the equivalent of 10 of those. So that's where you start to get into a big difference.
Right.
So next up,
lifespan.
Cycles.
So again, this varies.
Yes.
So a cycle would be the number of times you can take the battery down to that 50% state of discharge or depth of discharge. And these numbers vary. We picked averages from some of the more common manufacturers. So higher end manufacturers of flooded lead acid batteries, you may get more like 750 cycles or even 800. But 500 is pretty typical for your standard off-the-shelf flooded lead acid battery. So that means you could take it down. If you were to drain your batteries every day down to 50%, and charge them back up to 100% every single day, you would get 500 days worth of use before you'd start noticing dramatic decreases in their capacity. With AGMs, you get effectively double that. So again, because they resist sulfation better than the flooded lead acid batteries do, you get a longer lifespan. So that starts to even the playing field between AGM and flooded because they're now going to last twice as long.
And now the 3000 with lithium, again, we've used numbers that are kind of a composite average of claims and numbers from different manufacturers. 3,000 is not uncommon.
Oftentimes they'll claim 5,000 or even 10,000, depending. So with a lithium, if you did only discharge it down to 50%, you can significantly increase the lifespan of the battery and probably will never use up the life. Unless you're starting out at 20 and planning to RV in that RV for a long time.
So next comparison is the lifetime amp hours. And the way we got this number was real simple. We looked at the number of usable amp hours and the number of times you can take it down and use them. And basically, if you can use 220 amp hours 500 times on a flooded lead acid batteries, you have a lifetime amp hour usage out of it of 110,000 amp hours.
Right. So again, you can see the AGMs therefore have twice the lifetime amp hour capacity of their flooded lead acid equivalents. But lithium blows both of those out of the water because, again, they have so many cycles and you're able to use so much of the usable capacity of the battery. They really start taking the lead here.
So if you're thinking, this is maybe where lithiums aren't so expensive over the long run, now you're seeing where that comes in.
Right.
So then we take a look at what costs might be. And again, these are estimated costs. A typical flooded lead acid battery would probably cost somewhere around $150. And if you put 4 of them in your RV, like the example we have here, you've spent $600 on your battery bank and you're going to get 110,000 amp hours out of it, theoretically.
Right. Same thing then with the AGMs. They are more expensive. They're a little bit more than twice the cost of a typical flooded lead acid. Again, this is based off of Lifeline batteries, which are sort of the industry standard when you look at AGMs.
They're like the benchmark, and that's what we had for the past 7 years.
So then you're talking about a $1,300 nugget to bite off when you start building your battery bank.
Now, this one is a tough one. Again, lithium, this is a kind of an estimate. Right now, it is not uncommon to spend between $1,000 and $1,500 Actually, $1,000 to $2,000
per 100 amp hours of capacity.
So if you got a 100 amp hour battery, you could easily spend $1,000 to $2,000 on it. So you could spend $6,000 on that. Right. So it is much more expensive to come in. But it's kind of like buying a new car. The way you get your money's worth out of it, if you're looking at this strictly from a financial standpoint, is to keep it for a very long time and use it and not have to replace it over those many years.
Right. So then we get to the final little nugget. Cost per 100 amp hours. So again, this was taking the total lifetime amp hour capacity of the battery. So in the case of flooded, the 110,000 amp hours. And the $600 to get that, you end up with about a 55-cent per 100 amp hour lifetime capacity for the battery. So every 100 amp hours you use out of the battery costs you about 55 cents. Doing that with AGM, about 59 cents. So because they are little more than twice the price, it pushes it a little bit further. It is a little bit more expensive per 100 amp hours. But there's some pros and cons to that.
So now lithium the math works out to about 50 cents per 100 amp hours. Again, this is a very rough estimate of approximately what lithiums could reasonably cost.
Now, of course, the counter argument to that is whether or not you are going to be able to actually use the lithium lifespan. So depending on how much you use of your batteries every day, if you're not using a large percentage of the capacity, then their lifespan increases, and therefore you may never actually get this kind of return. But
so now let's get away from dollars and cents, because we tell people all the time, putting a bank of solar panels on your roof and a big lithium battery system isn't about the money. Of course, you have to be able to afford it. It's about quality of life. And because the most common question about solar panels is, how long does it take before they pay for themselves?
Right.
And we don't usually do those calculations because that's not what it's about. So let's take a look at what it really is about. It's about the benefits and the comparison between what you get with each type of battery. So with flooded lead acid batteries, these are the benefits and some of the drawbacks.
So, of course, being the cheapest, that means they have the lowest cost of entry. You can get them as cheap as possible. You can go to Sam's Club or Costco and get some deep cycle batteries for probably less than $100 a piece. That's great. It makes it really affordable. They work great for many people. So again, if you're a weekend RVer or just an occasional go out for a week-long thing, why are you going to spend the money on upgrading to AGMs or even lithium when you can get away with for much less money and maybe just replace them more often?
And when we say works great for many people, that includes the people who drive from full hookup to full hookup with their generator on. Why would they spend for higher level batteries? It makes no sense. You actually have to want to use them, which means camping without an electric hookup at least some of the time.
Now, of course, they also weigh less than AGMs. So AGMs, because of the heavier lead plates in them, that's part of what gives them their benefits and their longer lifespan, makes them heavier. So if you have a weight issue with your RV, then maybe flooded lead acid batteries are the better choice, at least if cost is also a matter.
You might have a travel trailer that has limitations on how much weight you can put in it, and now you're looking at that as a consideration. You might opt for the flooded batteries over AGMs with that in consideration.
And then when we say mostly weatherproof, we're actually talking about temperature in particular. So flooded lead acid batteries, as long as you keep them charged or keep a charger on them, are very resistant to freezing if your RV is stored for a long period of time. So as long as you keep them charged up, they are going to resist freezing. So that's great. You don't have to worry about them. You don't have to do anything necessarily special.
Now, the negatives are they require a fair amount of maintenance. And we have seen inside the battery compartments of people who never look at their batteries, and they have flooded lead acid batteries, and it looks like they have mushrooms and fungus and moss growing all over their entire battery compartment because they don't keep them clean. Everything is corroded, and they need to be checked. Every 30 days, they need to have the electrolyte checked. They need to be cleaned, and they do have to be cleaned because they make a mess from the outgassing.
Right. And again, sometimes that can be as a result of an improper charging profile on your charger. If it's overcharging them, then they're going to outgas more, and so then you get more of the acid causing corrosion in your battery tray. So that's
it's mostly due to neglect, though.
Correct. And then, of course, they also require being fully recharged in order to reach their maximum life. So if you drain them to 50%, you need to bring them back up to 100% within a fairly short period of time. You can't just let them sit drained, or they will again sulfate and you won't get the lifespan out of them. So again, that's part of the reason why a lot of people end up replacing their batteries more regularly, because they aren't properly charging them back up after having drained them.
So you have people who will run their generator to bring their batteries back up from 50%, and they'll run the generator for an hour and only bring the batteries back up to maybe 70%.
Right.
Or 75 or 80%. That is harmful to the long-term health of the batteries.
And again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that RV manufacturers don't, off the shelf, give you a lot of the tools that you would need, like a battery monitoring system that would actually show you the percentage state of charge of your batteries so that you have a better idea of what you're doing with them. If you're just looking at voltages, it's very hard to know for sure what the charge is.
But also, since flooded lead-acid batteries resist charging much more than lithiums and even more than AGMs, it takes longer running the generator to push that last bit of charge in, and a lot of people don't want to just leave their generator running for that purpose,
right,
especially when their absorbed charge cycle has ramped down so low the generator's just limping along.
Right.
So what about AGMs? What are the benefits of AGMs and the drawbacks?
Well, of course, the big benefit, and it was probably the primary benefit that we went after when we upgraded to AGMs, was they're maintenance free.
Almost completely maintenance free. They still do need to be equalized maybe every 6 months or so.
Or a year. Again, depends on how heavily you're using them. But
pretty much
as far as having to worry about checking the water levels and checking the specific gravities of the battery and having to clean them up and basically de-acid the compartment,
there is no such thing.
No such thing. So the AGMs are fantastic from that regard if you just want to ignore them and not have to worry about cleaning them up. That's
because of that lack of maintenance and the lack of liquid in them and outgassing, they can be installed indoors. You can actually put them, if you needed to move them, say you wanted more of them than your external battery compartment would allow, and you wanted to put them in the basement of the RV in an enclosed compartment or lay them on their side.
Again, some of the manufacturers don't necessarily recommend laying them on their side, but
some are okay
because
with it.
Yeah, exactly. Gel batteries are better option for that if you need to lay them on your side, but it is an option in some manufacturers.
So the theoretically longer life means fewer replacements, less times you have to pull your battery compartment apart to replace them.
So that, of course, just means you're paying more each time you do it for that benefit, but again, that could be a perk that would be beneficial to you.
They're also less finicky about charging. So if you don't get them up to 100% every time,
because they're more resistant to sulfating, that lack of fully recharging them generally has less of an effect on their overall lifespan. Not to say that it doesn't have some effect, but it is improved over flooded lead acid.
Now also, they're more weatherproof.
So again, the same thing, that's
a temperature
issue. So again, they are much better at being protected against freezing and things like that, so you don't have to worry about them when you're storing your RV.
Right. Now,
there are some cons.
There are a couple of cons. They are heavier. They're the heaviest battery you would put in because of the thicker plates. So
Correct.
if you were going to put those in a travel trailer or a smaller RV that had real weight considerations, that might be an issue. And also, they do cost more than twice as much generally, and the gains are somewhat modest.
Right. We certainly get why a lot of people will say, well, why am I going to bother upgrading from flooded lead acid to AGMs and spend twice as much and basically just not have to check the water every once in a while? So, for those people, great. Flooded lead acid batteries are obviously the better choice.
It's a nice quality of life issue. We liked having them.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely worth it for us.
Now, as far as lithiums go, let's get to the chase here, right? So, very rapid charging is one of the big benefits.
Yeah, we ranked that one first because that absolutely has been our probably most pleasant upgrade with the lithium, is the fact that we can run the generator and it just takes a charge. It's basically in bulk the whole way.
It's insane. It goes from bulk to ramming in as much power as the charger can possibly put out to saying, I'm done, and going to float literally within moments. It's amazing.
Of course, the larger capacity is another big benefit. So in effectively the same space, we're getting the power capacity of 10 times the number of batteries, or 10 batteries instead of...
And they are truly maintenance-free. There's no such thing as sulfation. There's no such thing as equalizing. There's obviously no outgassing. They can be put inside the RV, which could be important, depending on the one you get. We'll get to that in a moment.
And of course, long life.
Incredibly long life.
The most pessimistic estimate is that 3,000 life cycle. So that's 3 times longer than an AGM. And in all likelihood, most people will see 5,000 to even 10,000 cycles. So that's
that brings the lowest lifetime cost into play. Now, of course, you've got to keep the battery. You probably would have to use the batteries for 15 or 20 years to really get every penny out of it. But again, you can see we're not talking about money here. We're talking about quality of life benefits.
And of course, lastly, because we're talking about a completely different chemistry of battery, fully charging them is actually never really needed.
Oh, you missed the lightest weight.
Oh, I did miss the lightest weight. I'm
Don't
sorry.
forget,
I'm so excited about not have to ever fully charge them.
They're the lightest weight of all the batteries. We put our 600 amp hour, again, 540 usable amp hour Xantrex battery in, and it weighs 100 pounds less than the 4 Lifeline AGMs it replaced, which only had 220 usable amp hours.
So that's a big improvement. And so then
I
can say it again.
Now I can talk about full charge.
Full charge never needed. And that's, again, when you're dry camping, that's one of those things. It's that sort of ghost hovering around you all the time of having to worry about running the generator long enough to get the batteries fully recharged to help make sure that you don't ruin their lifespan. Not having to worry about that ever is actually unbelievably freeing.
If you have, so we had our batteries down really low the other day, and we purposely let them get down very low, and we ran the generator for 1 hour and replaced 25% of the battery's capacity in 1 hour. So think about that. If this battery bank equals 10 AGMs, that means we put the equivalent of 2.5 AGMs in 1 hour.
Right, and that's just based off of the fact that our inverter charger has a 150 amp capacity charger built into it. It doesn't actually normally put the full 150 amps in. We usually see about 125. There is obviously some loss in the process. But if we had a bigger charger even, we could charge it up even faster.
It'll take whatever you can put into it.
They really have very little resistance to charge.
Hi, Mike. I saw Mike came in. Hello. And he mentioned genset fuel savings is another benefit. Great point. You don't have to run the generator as long to get the charge in because it stays in bulk the whole time.
Exactly.
So there are a couple of downsides.
Obviously, freezing is a problem with lithium batteries. And again, if you put them into an outdoor compartment, the issue is that once the battery actually reaches 32 degrees Fahrenheit, now we're talking the battery, so if it's encased in something, it's actually the cells inside have to reach that temperature. But even so, if it reaches freezing, you cannot charge it.
And it's not that you'll hurt it if you charge it. The battery monitoring you'll destroy it, but you can't because the battery monitoring system will stop it from accepting a charge. And so if you're in a cold, and a lot of people say, well, I'll just go to Florida or Arizona every winter. It gets below freezing here in Arizona sometimes.
Sure.
Matter of fact, I think it's supposed to this week.
Yeah, exactly. We won't be in short-sleeved shirts for too much longer.
Yeah, so...
But again, maybe you want to go skiing and you want to take your RV to a ski resort. And yeah, you can use the power out of the battery, but you can't put it back in. So it becomes rapidly limiting as a result.
Now, you'll notice we have an asterisk next to freezing equals no charging. That is because, as those of you who followed our installation on our Xantrex battery know, that does not apply in our case because the battery senses when the temperature drops too low and heats itself using its own power. Right. It's brilliant, and it doesn't matter if it gets below freezing. Our battery is installed in the same outside compartment that our original lead-acid batteries were in. No problem. We don't have to worry.
Right. Then, of course, there's the big one, which is what usually gets everybody when you start talking about lithium, which is the higher upfront costs.
The elephant in the room.
Yes, that $6,000 number that we had on the previous chart, yeah, that's a big nugget to bite off. And we don't blame people for being concerned, like, I don't want to do that.
And we will get into some theoretical pricing when we answer your questions, which we, I think, are ready to do.
Yes, and I just wanted to toss in one other thing about those higher upfront costs. Depending upon your system, there may be other components you need to buy in order to make your system lithium compatible. So there are additional costs above and beyond the actual purchase of the battery.
And we'll get into some of those.
We will.
In answering these questions. So let's start off here. So first off, thanks so much for being patient while we got through that little overview and presentation about batteries. Time for the main event, which...
Drum roll.
Your questions. And why don't you go back to the aerial footage here real quick so you can remind people why we are negligent in getting to your questions. We're slackers because this is where we are. If you got here late, we just want to show you again real quick. This is an actual shot of our location where we are broadcasting.
It's not actually a live shot because it is dark out there right now.
It's dark out right now, but we are broadcasting from the Kofa National Wildlife Refuge. That is right where we've been parked for the last week, and we're planning to stay a while because it's fantastic.
That's right.
Anyway, sorry about that.
Just had to brag.
First question was from John. John Shretland, thank you, asked, he had a bit of a question here. I'm going to read through most of it. I'm going to be replacing my house batteries this coming summer. AGM to probably AGM. When you changed yours, I know that you labeled every connection, like number 1 positive and number 1 negative, number 8 positive, number 8 negative, etc., which is a great idea, and he will do the same. Can we please go over the order that we disconnected everything? Also, he has 2 solar controllers that run through 50 amp fuses to the batteries. John wants to know if that's the first thing that he should disconnect when he's changing the batteries out, and if so, can he just pull the fuses, or should he leave the fuses in and disconnect from the batteries? And lastly, John wanted to know if he can assume that reconnecting the batteries is the opposite of the disconnecting order. So
if we don't answer all of those, make sure you hit us up in the comment section if we forget one. But
So the order of disconnect is only important in a couple of spots. When you first start to disconnect and when you finish reconnecting at the end. Mm-hmm. As we mentioned in our video, and we will after this, we'll put a link to our video about replacing batteries in the Patreon post for today's live.
So anybody who wants to refresh their memories about what John's talking about, can watch that.
Right. So when you disconnect batteries, you want to start by disconnecting the main ground leads, the main cold leads. And there may be 2.
Right. So yeah, I'm assuming your King Air, John, is an awful lot like our Mountain Air, which is there will be one that's actually the master ground that's grounding the batteries to the chassis itself in order to set up the main ground for the whole RV. And then there's the other major ground, which is actually going over to the inverter. So if you look at them closely, you'll see which is which. Usually the one for the inverter, actually the positive one for the inverter will go through the big fuse block. And then the other negative one, you'll see it going out the same way through the battery compartment.
So you want to start your process by removing those 2 ground leads and setting those aside. And the very next thing you're going to do is take the 2 main hot leads and take them off. Right. And it's the same thing. One goes to the inverter charger, and the other one is going to go to your 12-volt supply. So for things that aren't inverted.
Now, actually, there's that one caveat, which is because you have those 2 solar chargers that are providing power into the system, you are indeed going to want to remove those 2 50 amp fuses first. And the reason being, you don't want those leads, once you disconnect them from the battery, being hot, because you don't want to risk sparking and causing a problem either with the charger or with your continued existence.
You want to shut off everything. So
Yes.
Obviously you're going to disconnect from shore power. You're going to turn off your house batteries, turn off your chassis batteries in the engine compartment, and turn off your solar panels. And we have an on-off switch on ours, just like you have fuses. If you don't, you need to cover them and make sure no power is coming in. That's the first thing to do.
Absolutely.
Then disconnect the cold, disconnect the hot, and then the order in which we disconnected all of our other battery cables really had to do with how they were laid in place. We kind of went from left to right, I think, but some were on top of others and we had to pull them off the top. The main thing you want to be careful of is not to accidentally touch a hot to a negative. If you touch a positive and a negative, and that includes your socket wrench that you're using, we recommend taking electrical tape and wrapping the entire handle of the socket wrench so you can't accidentally short from a hot to a cold by touching the terminals across.
Or from a hot to the chassis frame or anything like that. So
right. If you did that by accident, well, that's one of the reasons you've disconnected all that stuff first. So if you touch the frame, it's not connected to the bank. But if you were to take a socket wrench and accidentally touch the positive and negative terminals on a battery, you are going to be in for a light show like you are not interested in seeing. You could actually weld your socket wrench to the battery, and you could start a fire.
Yeah, there's a lot of amps flowing from those batteries.
12-volt batteries are pretty harmless until you connect the positive and the negative directly to each other. So make sure you are careful in taking them off in whatever order you take them off, not to touch any wires as you take off one side. Hold the end up in the air, take the other end of the cable off, and then move it away from there. Don't allow it to flop around on the batteries while you're doing it. Yeah. And other than that, the order doesn't matter. No. And as far as reconnecting, reverse the whole thing with the second to last thing you're going to install are the hot leads, and the final thing you'll do are those final 2 ground leads.
Mm-hmm. And then you'll put your fuses back into your solar charge controllers.
Right.
So
hope we answered that one, John.
Yeah, leave us a question or a comment if we missed something.
Right. So next up, Sal asked, and we're answering these questions in the order that they came in, as we always do. So Sal asked, if I swap out lead acid for AGM, can I stick with the same charger?
Oh, you're going to love this answer, Sal. It depends. So it depends on your charger. So if you have a charger that actually has different charge profiles for flooded lead acid and gel and AGM, then in all likelihood you'll be able to keep your existing charger. You'll just need to change the charge profile to match your new batteries.
Right. We kept the same charger when we switched from flooded lead acid to AGM, no problem.
Correct.
That's because we had the proper 3-stage charger, which is bulk, absorb, float, which is the proper way to maintain all of those batteries, but the voltages of those are different.
Right. So even with that, at the time we had the Magnum inverter charger. When we upgraded to AGMs, Magnum has 2 different AGM profiles, one of which they had specifically designed to be for Lifeline batteries. But in the interim from when that Magnum was manufactured and we bought our Lifelines, Lifeline actually changed their charge profile. So we ended up having to use a custom setting on ours in order to make sure that our Lifelines were being charged properly. So that's why it depends. If you have a more recent, either a Magnum or a Xantrex or a Victron inverter charger, then in all likelihood, at a minimum, you will be able to set up the custom charge profile to match the voltages needed for whatever AGM batteries you end up purchasing.
And if you're unsure, you should ask the manufacturer or refer to the manufacturer's instructions and specs for your batteries particularly, but for the inverter charger or charger as well.
Yes.
So before we go on to the next one, I'm just going to jump in here real quick before we go to the next question. Mike said that he wraps the grounds in their own plastic bag, and the same with the positive leads to the coach. Mike, you are a cautious man. We approve. David Lee asked, any rule of thumb for discharge cycles of flooded lead acid batteries when they're not drawn down below 90% most of the time? My batteries are just over 3 years old, and they've only been near 50% depth of discharge 4 or 5 times in that span.
Well, so yes, actually, the shallower you discharge the batteries, the longer their typical life cycles is. And so literally, I think going from 50% to 80% depth of discharge, I'm sorry, if you go from 50% depth of discharge to 20% depth of discharge, it doubles the lifespan of the battery.
And by 20% depth of discharge, you mean 80% capacity.
80%
right?
capacity.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
so
you've gone from 100%
20%.
to 80%.
But there is actually a diminishing return where if you are very shallow cycling them, they actually do end up sulfating. So deep cycle batteries are designed to be drained and then recharged.
Right.
And that big recharging is what bubbles. You get the bubbling in the battery, and that bubbling is the sulfate on the plates.
Let me explain real quickly, if you're not familiar with what equalizing is.
Well, it's not even a matter of just equalizing.
Well, I'm talking
about... Hold on.
Go ahead.
It's the fact that if you only discharge them a little bit, then the bulk cycle in the charger process is very, very short. So the voltage is going to come up very quickly, and it's going to go right into absorb. And therefore, it's that bulk portion of the charging cycle where the charger is pushing large amps into the battery that gets it bubbling. And it's that bubbling that releases the sulfate from the lead plates and puts it back into solution in the acid.
And doing less of that will cause sulfation, which is why I was pivoting into equalizing.
Yes.
So if, in case you're not familiar, or anyone who's watching this, any of you aren't familiar with what sulfation is, it is when the lead comes out of, basically, the sulfuric acid
in the liquid in the battery.
Correct.
Reacts with the lead.
And it basically comes out of suspension and gets attached to the plates.
Right. It forms lead sulfate on the surface of the plate.
And that starts at the bottom and kind of works its way up like a cake, where it's basically, it can't work when it's not in suspension. That electrolyte has to have that in suspension.
It has to actually be able to react with the lead plate. And so if that lead sulfate is in the way, the acid in the liquid can't reach the lead to cause the chemical reaction that generates electricity.
So what happens?
The other thing is, with the lead sulfate fully formed on the plates, it means there's less sulfuric acid in the liquid, and therefore the reaction is less vigorous. So all of that relies on the charging cycle to basically reverse the chemical reaction and take that lead sulfate and put it back to being lead and sulfuric acid.
However, all lead acid batteries and even AGMs do experience sulfation at some time and to some degree. Mm-hmm. And the way you get rid of that, as much as can be done, is through something called equalizing. And basically an equalized cycle, which many inverter chargers are capable of doing, and many chargers can do, is like a supercharge where it will take the batteries and ramp them up to 15 and a half volts or more and basically bubble the hell out of them.
Mm-hmm. And it helps to A, break that lead sulfate off the plates, and B, that bubbling helps to basically remix the sulfuric acid in the liquid to make sure that it doesn't get stratified, so you don't end up with a difficulty where not all the lead is being exposed to the high acid electrolyte. So it's very important. So again, if you are only shallow cycling them, that's where that can end up becoming a problem long term. And so even shallow cycling then ends up needing to have an equalized done.
So I won't miss any of your questions that are coming in on the chat. I see those, but before we get to those, we're going to jump to our next question that was asked in advance, and then we'll make sure we get all the questions that are in the chat, so don't go away.
So we won't forget you.
So Kirk, I want to say a special welcome to Kirk.
Yes, this is hopefully this is your first live
That's
Q&A.
What we understand. Kirk, welcome as a new patron.
Yes,
we really appreciate that, and we're so excited that you're here for the first time.
We hope that this live chat is as exciting as you are anticipating it being.
If this live chat isn't as exciting as you were hoping, go back and watch some of the others. We had some multiple cameras going a couple of times in the past, and there wasn't anything here that...
Hey, we had a whole multimedia presentation here. I'm working it on the iPad and everything. Look at that.
That's true. That's true. So anyway, Kirk's question was, I'd like to inquire how you handle the engine's alternator with the AGM start batteries and the Xantrex Lithium house bank. Also, did you install the Xantrex intelligent sequencer during the upgrade? I just found your video. Oh, and then afterward, he mentioned that he found our video on the charging from the rig's alternator using a separate Xantrex charger. And his only remaining question is, where does the true charger get its power? Well,
okay, so
a couple of things.
First things first. So how we handle the engine's alternator with the AGM start batteries and the Xantrex Lithium. So our RV came from the factory with a system called the BIRD. BIRD.
Bidirectional relay delay.
Basically, it was a little circuit board and a couple of big solenoids, one of which is basically targeted with joining the house and chassis battery banks together when needed. Mm-hmm. So the little circuit board monitors the voltage of both battery banks, and if one of them starts to rise, so we're on shore power charging and the house battery bank charges up, once it reaches a certain voltage, it closes the solenoid, brings the house battery bank into the system, and so that the chassis battery into the system so it can get charged. If it happened to bring the house battery voltage down too low as a result of joining the two together, it would separate them again. And basically it would do that in either direction. So when we're running the engine, the alternator would start charging the chassis batteries up, and once their voltage came up to the correct level, the solenoid would close, and it would join the house batteries into the chassis batteries to allow the alternator to charge.
So now, while we're driving,
Xantrex...
both battery banks are still charged by the alternator.
Yes, so Xantrex replaced the brains of that system with a custom circuit that we are basically beta testing for them.
We're testing it, and it's working quite well so far.
Which effectively, it upgraded the brains of the BIRD to use the voltage pattern of the lithium battery to join the lithium to the chassis battery while we're driving, if it needed to be charged.
And it does. And so while we're driving, the bird connects them together and makes sure that the chassis and house batteries are all being charged by the alternator. And one of the things that we are looking at potentially doing as part of this
ongoing
process is to get a larger capacity alternator to provide more charging while we're driving down the highway, because it's such a large capacity battery that the current alternator doesn't fully charge it unless we're going on
our current alternator doesn't output enough current.
That's it.
Strangely enough. Now, interestingly, the original bird would do that joining in both directions, whether we were driving the RV, so using the alternator, or plugged into shore. The new circuitry only does that when we're driving. So it actually checks for ignition and only operates when the ignition is on. So when we're parked, it does not allow the chassis batteries to be joined to the house batteries while the inverter charger is charging the house battery, because the charge profile of our inverter charger is now set up for lithium batteries, which would not be healthy for the AGM.
So our inverter charger does not charge the chassis batteries.
Correct.
Which is very unusual, but that's the case here. And that's part of this being kind of a one-off design. Again, this was a case study for doing this installation of the Freedom eGen in a Class A diesel pusher, which had never been done before. And we're going to show you exactly how they did that. But first, I want to make sure we've answered the question about the intelligent sequencer.
So yes, that intelligent sequencer, no, we did not have that installed as part of our system, although we did discuss it with Xantrex. We already have the IntelliTech EMS, which does sort of the same thing. It's not quite as smart.
Up behind that door right there.
Right there.
Right.
If it wasn't so darkly tinted, you could actually see the lights if we were plugged into shore power. But it does some of the same things. It's not as smart as the intelligent sequencer.
So now we're going to explain how it is that we have two separate chargers on board now. And this was a really clever, inexpensive way that Xantrex did that. So what you're looking at here on the right is our Xantrex inverter charger. And you may have seen a video where we installed that.
Right, that was our own little upgrade.
Right, we put that in place of our Magnum, which had failed. And so over on the left, you'll notice a smaller
ding, ding, ding
box over there that's the same color, and it says Xantrex on it, if you can read it, although it's mounted upside down, so it says Xantrex upside down. What you're looking at there is a simple
Xantrex True Charge, it's called.
Right.
It's a little 10 amp charger, and it is wired directly to the chassis batteries so that it is able to charge them when we are on shore power or running the generator.
And when we're on shore power, that gets signal to charge the chassis batteries. Now, you had a great question there. How does it get its power? And not only how does it get its power, how does it know when to turn on?
That was another one of those trick little things that having Xantrex engineers by our side during the install paid off.
So check this out.
So on the side of the inverter,
and what you're looking at here, so
here, if I go back
to the other
this
one, point at where you're looking here.
So here, oops.
So
let me grab that.
What you're pointing at here,
on this side, behind this red little cover here, is where we're going next.
See, if you didn't think this had enough multimedia, we're making sure.
We had to make sure. This is all for you, Kirk. So we are here on the side. You can see.
You can't point now, can you?
I can.
Can you really?
Yes.
Look at that.
So I can't point well because it's going to go off the screen, but here's that little red cover. And so we're looking over here on the side. This is a GFCI outlet. It's an upgrade, an optional kit that can come with a Xantrex inverter charger. And it just it has all the little prongs, and you take a little plate off and then you install this. Now, normally this GFCI outlet is wired so that it receives its power as the output power of the inverter, because it would basically be enabling you to plug in some devices into the inverter directly in order to provide power to them. So if you were doing an aftermarket install of an inverter, you might not necessarily have the wiring or want to do the wiring to actually put in a separate electrical box, all those kind of things. You may just want to plug in directly to the inverter. So this little add-on, instead of being wired into the output of the inverter, right behind that panel, there's also access to the input power to the inverter. So that is the shore power or generator power. In our RV, the shore power and the generator power go to a transfer switch, and then the output from that goes to our main breaker box, and one output from that is then the 110 volt input to the inverter charger.
Now, as a result, that means that outlet right there knows when you're hooked up to shore power or the generator's running, and
that little upper plug right there is what goes over to the True Charge charger. So whenever we are on shore power or whenever we run the generator, that little True Charge charger sees shore power, sees power to it, and it starts charging the chassis batteries
and
if they need it.
We can't take credit for that brilliant thing because
No.
Xantrex did that, which is why this was not a DIY installation. And we're going to get to a couple of other questions about if and when it will be shortly.
Yes.
But hopefully we answered your question there, Kirk. Before we go on...
Oh, I jumped ahead, sorry. Sorry.
Before you go on to the next one, I just want to catch up with the
Sure.
questions here. So, John Shretland said, thanks. You're welcome, John. Hope that
great.
answered the question. James Dion asks, like tires have date codes, do batteries have date codes? And if they do, how do you read them?
I actually just read something about that the other day, as a matter of fact.
John might have the answer here.
I read somewhere online, they normally do have a date sticker on them, just sort of stuck to the battery.
Yeah, but what they do is when the date they sell it, they scratch out the date it's sold. It's
Right.
not the date it was manufactured, is it?
So a neat little tip that I heard was to actually look at the lead posts on the battery, and there will be a code stamped into that post. So it may be like B7. And supposedly that means B would be the second month, February, and 7 would be 2007.
Really?
So that means they were manufactured in February of 2007. You might need to Google, if you're looking at a specific brand of battery, you might need to Google to find that code, and that way you'd be able to be that much smarter when you're in the store.
Cool. Well, hopefully that's correct, since that is new information we haven't fully
And
researched.
if not,
correct?
I blame that on the interwebs.
So, David Lee... Oh, he mentions he equalizes once a month.
Oh, great, yeah.
Good info. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
David.
So
That's,
then,
I would just say equalizing once a month could be too often. So,
Yes.
so here's the thing. Every time you equalize, you're boiling away your lead plates a little bit.
And so they will actually flake a little bit of lead off, which accumulates down at the bottom of the battery, and then that lead is useless.
So
It's not
rather
working.
than equalize once a month, it could be too much of a good thing. Here's what we'd recommend. John will tell me if he agrees with this.
Okay.
Fully charge your batteries. Turn off the charger and let them sit at rest, which means no power going in and no power going out. Let them sit for at least an hour or two. Then get a good hydrometer, the kind with the vertical float in it, and take hydrometer readings. If your batteries are sitting at rest at 12.87 specific gravity,
1.287, actually.
I'm sorry, 1.287, got my decimal wrong.
And it might be 1.277. It's been a while since we've had flooded lead acid batteries.
I think it's 1.28. We haven't had them in a long time. Don't equalize.
Right.
You only want to equalize when fully charged batteries don't have full readings on specific gravity.
Basically, what that means is if that specific gravity is lower than the 1.28, that means there's not enough sulfuric acid in the liquid. So
means they're not sulfated, and there's no reason to boil.
No, I'm saying if it's not at the 1.28, it means they are getting sulfated.
But if they are,
or we're talking about it from the opposite side.
If they are fully at 1.28 specific gravity,
it means all the sulfur is in suspension in the liquid.
And all you'll be doing is aging your plates by doing that. I would suggest to you that unless you are taking your batteries down extremely low, which it sounds like you're very meticulous about them, and you're not taking them below 50%, I would suggest that you probably only need to equalize once every 6 months.
Yeah, right.
So you might want to take a look at that. Get yourself that good hydrometer. And
it also depends on how long you're equalizing for. So it depends on your inverter charger. I know our original Xantrex Freedom 458 that came on our bounder, you'd trigger it and it would run a 4-hour cycle.
Right.
Our Magnum ran an 8-hour cycle. So it depends on your inverter charger and whether or not you're actually interrupting that cycle.
So let's see. Let's get to a couple others here. Richie asked, what brand solar controller can relay the amps from the solar panels to the Schneider Connext COM-box? I have a 3,000 watt Xantrex inverter charger to view the power profile from all sources. By the way, that's what we have.
Okay, so you wouldn't be putting the output from the solar charge controller into the COM-box. I think what you're asking actually is what brand of solar charge controller can the CommBox display in its display of information, and that would literally be the only one that can, which is the Schneider Electric. So we had one, I forget the model number.
And for those who don't know, Schneider Electric is the parent company of Xantrex, or they were. They just got sold.
Yeah, they just changed hands. But in any event, basically the Xantrex, whatever charge controller that Xantrex is selling for their solar should hopefully be ZAN bus enabled and report in.
That's one of the things that's currently in process with our system.
Yep.
That our system is not fully ZAN bus enabled yet, and when it is, it's going to be even better. It'll be able to communicate better.
Right. So basically all of that has to do with if each of the components, if your solar charge controller, your inverter charger, your system control panel, your auto gen start, and your CommBox are all from Xantrex, and they're all ZAN bus, which is Xantrex's CAN bus implementation, then they all speak to one another and you'll see the info. So our solar charge controller is an early iteration of that, and so we see the info, but it's not completely integrated.
So Leisure Travel and Locks asked, does your generator still charge the new battery pack when you use it? Yes, indeed it does.
And it actually charges both battery sets. So it charges the lithium house battery, and
that is critically important because no matter how much solar you have and how much battery capacity you have, you need to charge it with a generator from time to time.
Like we always say, rain happens and night happens.
Clouds happens. Sometimes you'll be dry camping in the forest in a national forest campground or boondocking in the woods somewhere, and you're not going to get any solar. The generator must charge both battery banks. Very important. Let's grab another couple out of here before we go back to our pre-asked questions.
When is Newmar bringing out the RV Geek model coach? Asked by James Dion.
James, would you do me a favor, please? Would you call Newmar and ask that question?
All existing Newmar owners here on this Patreon chat, would you please contact Newmar and ask them when they're coming out with that? We'd love to know.
Thank you. And
does your upgrade include a new transfer switch for switching between shore or generator power? No, actually, that was the standard one that came in our motorhome. So Newmar shipped ours with that transfer switch.
Well, actually, we replaced our transfer switch quite a number of years ago.
Ours did fail. Yeah, it was an IOTA.
That was pre-YouTube days. We did not make a video of that. So let's jump back into anything here else we should grab. Oh, and the locks also meant to. In the old days, they added sulfuric acid when the battery was sold to the customer. I remember that.
That was smart. I don't know why they don't do that still. Probably because they would end up having the staff burn themselves on sulfuric acid.
So I'll just jump back. The locks have asked, do the lithium batteries charge up quicker? I know you came in a little late, so I won't go over the whole detail again, because if you can watch this in the...
He's just trying to get another view.
In the replay... Yes, indeed. Yes. It is maybe the single most amazing thing about lithium batteries, that they take a massive bulk charge all the way through till they're full. And
that's awesome.
It's crazy good.
Yeah, I want to get a second inverter charger so we can charge them even faster.
So let's move on to our next question that was asked in advance from Don.
Yes.
Who said, if my diesel pusher is parked for 6 months through the winter and run every 30 days or so, would one of these small 5-watt or less solar chargers be worthwhile to keep the coach batteries, which are 4 flooded lead-acid batteries, just like we've been talking about? Would that keep them topped off? And the short and the long answer to this one, Don, is no.
Those little 5-watt solar panels are basically installed so that RV manufacturers can say they have solar.
And we had one of those on the roof of our Bounder. We have one on the roof here. You could paint over it and it wouldn't matter. They do so little.
Yeah, basically a 5-watt solar panel, if it was actually putting out maximum power, is putting out it's actually less than half an amp of charging. Right. So it would work great if you were just talking about putting it on the roof of your car and keeping a standard starting battery, 12-volt battery, sort of from getting depleted from just sitting parked for a long period. But if you're talking about 4 deep cycle RV batteries for 6 volts in series parallel, that little 5-watt solar panel's doing nothing.
Right. So, you need to have a much, much larger solar panel before it's going to really do much of anything at all.
And then even then, I would ask, where are you parking it in storage? So
I assume you're not parking it indoors. So
Well,
I'm
obviously,
only
yes.
kidding, of course, but
But if you're parking it in Wisconsin, where you're going to get covered in snow and it's going to be really
Yeah.
low light during the day,
Or-
putting a larger solar panel on may not necessarily be worth it. It might be better to either look for a spot where you could park your RV and leave it plugged in to keep the charger active, or literally disconnect the terminals from your batteries in order to keep all the drains from draining them. So charge them up fully and then disconnect them.
Right.
It's sort of a catch-22 as to how you want to deal with that, but no, that little 5-watt charger is doing nothing.
It's really doing nothing at all. So next question in advance came from Bill and Lynn.
Hi, Bill and Lynn.
Hi, Bill and Lynn. Can you give us an update, if there is one, on the retail availability of the Lithium unit you had installed?
That's an excellent question.
What a
Bill
great
Lynn.
question.
And unfortunately, it came in during the Christmas week shutdown at Xantrex, so we were unable to follow up with our contacts there.
Yeah, our contacts at Xantrex are out from
after the New
Christmas
Year.
through New Year's, and we called them and got voicemail and emailed them.
But prior to that, they have been making updates on the website. They've definitely been putting more information out there and are definitely proceeding with more retail availability.
And we do have some anecdotal. Was this the one?
Yes, there was some anecdotal. Somebody else actually commented on the YouTube channel saying that they were currently working with Xantrex to have the eGen installed on a new RV that they were having manufactured. I think it was a fifth wheel from DRV. So they were working with them to have that installed. So that means Xantrex is definitely broadening their OEM reach. And we do know that they have been in discussions with a number of aftermarket installers and trying to get them certified. From what we understand, as of right now, it will be happening sometime this year. When this year, we don't know specifically.
Right. And we have no commitment from them yet, but we promise we will keep you updated. We will be going back to Xantrex this spring when we're back in British Columbia, sometime this spring or summer.
I'm sure we'll be talking with them before then anyway. So if we do hear anything more from them, we will post it here on Patreon. Also, again, just to be clear, they are not at the current moment that we know of pursuing an actual retail direct-to-consumer sale.
Like you could buy it on Amazon and install it yourself.
Right.
That is not immediately in the works to our understanding because of many of the things we talked about with the installation we did. Mm-hmm. Well, that they did with us.
Or that we did with them.
For us.
We mostly watched.
This is not really a DIY project at this point, but
there will be certified installers for aftermarket installation.
Based on what we've seen so far, it's not necessarily that far-fetched to think that it could be in the reasonable
And we're
future.
not saying that, we're not saying that they won't eventually go to a full direct-to-retail sale, but at the moment we have not heard word of that.
Okay, and before we go to the next question here, let's just jump back into the chat real quick. David Lee said that Schneider Electric also owns Square D electrical components that you find at Lowe's. David, do you really work at Lowe's? Are you the electrical associate there? That's great, because we're going to find out which one, and we're coming for your
exactly.
We're coming to your store. Also, the locks mentioned that there are parasitic draw issues, right?
So again, that is the issue. Obviously, that's why you want to have some kind of a charger on your batteries if you are leaving it in storage, because even the as they call it, the salesman shut-off switch where you disconnect the house batteries, oftentimes there are other components that are wired directly to it. So like your propane or gas detector is often wired directly to the battery. So even when you turn off the house switch, there's still draws happening against the battery.
And with the assumption being that you're storing your rig because it's wintertime, now you have cold issues, and you really want to make sure you keep the batteries charged. So I see the locks mentioned that their Go Power controller charges the house batteries first, then switches over to the chassis battery.
Right.
Okay, and also, do we have an email for Q&A with Xantrex? Nothing listed. Actually, the people we deal with there are engineers. They aren't in public relations. They don't really deal with... I don't want to say anything negative about their interpersonal skills, but they're
very nice people.
Let's just say they're extremely good with electronics,
and they're not consumer facing.
So it's not. We don't deal with the consumer side of things with Xantrex.
But I don't know if I will go look for it and see if we find anything from just a marketing perspective.
We can put it in the post.
We can put it in the post, so we'll put a link there if there's anybody to speak to about.
Great. So let's go into
the final question.
This is our final question
that
we got here. This is from Kirk. Kirk. Kirk, you're here. This is great. We hope you're with us.
Yeah, really. Thank you for submitting the questions.
You're here live. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Actually, Kirk, I have a challenge for you. John Shretlin is usually our first questioner when we post for these live Q&As. So the gauntlet is being dropped, Kirk, to see if you can get a question in faster than John. That's for the next one.
That's how you're going to treat a brand new patron, by giving them a challenge like that?
A little homework.
So, Kirk asked, concerning our 600 amp hour Xantrex lithium battery, if one of the cells fails, can they be individually replaced? And Kirk also saw Bill and Lynn's question, our previous question, about the retail availability, and he wondered if we have a guess about the cost.
Both excellent questions.
So, concerning the...
and he says he's still here, so... You're hanging in there, Kirk. We haven't lost you.
That's awesome. So, we could not get the answer to that very, very good question about the replaceability of a cell. I would say this.
No.
There are no user serviceable parts inside that that gray box.
I will guarantee you that Xantrex does not want that package being opened. Now, that being said...
Can they repair it is the question.
Yeah, I don't know for sure whether or not an individual cell could be repaired. The whole idea of the system is that the BMS is literally monitoring every individual cell and caring for it very specifically so that you would not have an individual cell failure. That said... Of course, all the best laid plans. It could happen, but I would imagine even if it is replaceable, it's going to have to be brought back to a Xantrex certified repair location and probably sent somewhere. So
we don't know what the internals of the battery are.
Well, we have actually seen inside, but was
okay. But that was you're not even supposed to say we saw that. We were privy. We had to go through security to get inside Xantrex's inner lab when this battery was being put together before it was even ready for us, almost a year ahead of time. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But we can't say anymore.
Or we'd have to kill ourselves.
Now, as far as the cost,
yes,
that is a very common question.
You might actually again, we don't
first off, we don't know.
We don't know. Xantrex has been mum about what their retail cost for the unit is going to be, so we do not have any inside information on that to date. But based off of the typical going rate of roughly $1,000 to $2,000 per 100 amp hours of battery capacity in the lithium world,
that means our battery could cost somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000. Just for the battery.
Correct. Now
we're saying it could. We're not saying it does. Like we've said, we don't know. It's not cheap, but remember, it's the equivalent of 6 typical drop-in replacement type 100 amp hour lithium batteries, and it only takes the space of 4.
Right.
And I don't know of any other battery on the market like that. Plus, it's self-heating.
Correct.
So
there are other aspects that could, of course, drive the cost higher than the $12,000 estimate, but once we know, we of course will make it available, but so far Xantrex has been mum on that.
Right. So let's go back to full screen there and get a couple of other comments here from... I see Iggy has a great idea about putting lithium on a narrowboat. Iggy, I trust that you saw our wonderful narrowboat experience with David Johns of Cruising the Cut. I think that's a smashing idea.
Maybe it'll be our next lithium
as they would
battery
say
video
in England.
Yeah, well, we'd have to ship it over there because I doubt we can bring it with us on the plane.
David asked, will this video be archived? David, all of our Patreon live Q&As are automatically archived at the same link that you are watching it at now, and they are there permanently, exclusively for your viewing as a patron. Even new patrons who come in now, like Kirk, if you haven't gone back and watched the archived versions of all of our previous live Q&As,
they are there.
They are there for reference purposes. So Richie Rich asked, a 3,000 watt inverter charger is approximately 23 to 24 amps. If I want 50 amps, I would have to have 2 Xantrex inverter chargers that are 3,000 watts each.
Well, so you would either have to go that kind of a route, which... You can stack the Xantrex inverter chargers so that they behave as a single.
Yeah, do they make a really super big one?
They don't. I don't know of any inverter charger that goes over 3,000 watts for the inverting side, and I don't know of one that has a larger charger. But you could actually
split
simplify
the system.
Well, no, I was going to say, since you probably don't need more than 3,000 watts of inverter capacity, you could actually add a second charger in. So you could just get a dedicated charger. It would have to be lithium compatible or programmable so that it could do the correct charge profile. But basically, the whole system doesn't really care where the power is coming from. So you could actually put a second charger in line. Well, again, it would be the kind of thing I would want to confirm absolutely with the Xantrex engineer.
But there are many large motorhomes that come with more than one inverter on them.
It's true.
Like dedicated for the refrigerator, for example.
Correct. Or powering half the RV, basically, one side or the other.
Real big rigs have more than one inverter on board, and they basically split the system, and different things run off different inverters.
So it could technically be done. I'm not sure if that would necessarily be worth it. Just depends on your need for how quickly you need to recharge your battery.
John, John Shretlin lives in BC, not far from Xantrex headquarters, and was there during the installation.
Right, he saw it happening.
He saw it all happening. And John mentioned that we might want to say that our installer worked for a marine power company.
Yes.
And my guess is that the first outside Burnaby Xantrex approved installers will also be in the marine business.
It's quite possible.
What was the name of that company again?
Pacific Yacht Systems, which actually they now have branched out to have a whole division called Pacific Mobile Power Systems, because they're branching out beyond marine. That is true. We had a link to them in the original post when we had the YouTube video. You can go over to thervgeeks.com and just find where we actually did the battery install, and there's a link to them there. So yes, they are a Xantrex certified installer. Again, I don't know at what point Xantrex is with their actual rollout of them being able to install the eGen system aftermarket.
Also,
but there will be others.
Yes. The locks mentioned that Battleborn claims that the way their batteries are designed with many small multiple cells, that a cell failure only slightly affects overall performance. I don't know too much about Battleborn. I know they are not heated and can't be put outside without taking some sort of insulation precautions.
But basically every lithium battery on the market is made up of multiple little cells.
Yeah, and I'm not stating, but I'm assuming that ours is likely the same situation. But again, we don't want to state that categorically because we don't know. Also, you asked about the weight. Leisure Travel and Locks, you're asking about the weight of our battery. Is that if you could confirm?
Yeah, if so,
let us know if that's what you're asking about. We can answer that one because we know the exact weight of it. Although I don't know if we might have to look that up. Actually,
I just know it was 100 pounds less than our old AGMs.
Yeah, I bet I could find that.
It probably is in there.
I bet I could find that. Let me take a look.
Yeah, and actually Iggy mentioned the Winds. Nikki and Jason have Gone with the Winds. When they moved onto their boat, they actually did a really good video talking about some of the same stuff we covered, it from a different perspective of looking at AGMs, because for a boat, you would never use flooded lead-acid batteries because of the danger of the acid and the hydrogen outgassing. So they were looking at AGMs and lithium and talked about basically looking at all of the parameters about how many AGM batteries you would need. So definitely, if you haven't watched that, go over to Gone with the Winds and check that out. It was really well done.
So I found the specs on our battery. It weighs 160 pounds.
So that's just the battery. The BMS itself weighs maybe a pound.
And the 240 pounds was the weight of our AGMs that came out. 260 pounds.
Yes.
Was almost exactly 100 pounds less.
I think 264.
I think that's right. It was 104 pounds less.
We're getting better fuel economy, too.
Yeah. Well, I can't believe I could pull that up so fast.
Yeah, that was fast. Yeah.
The modern computers is fantastic.
Couldn't have pulled that out of our own heads.
And thank you also for mentioning about the narrowboat video. Thank you so much. We had the time of our lives.
We really did.
If you see us moving to a narrowboat, don't be surprised. Also, the locks mentioned...
Oh, yeah, they can be paralleled. The inverter chargers, there's a stacking port on the Xantrex inverters, and so you stack them together so that they basically get treated as one unit and communicate with each other. I haven't actually seen it done, but supposedly possible.
Great. So, if...
Ta-da! I think that's...
We would like to open this up to any other questions you have before we say goodnight, because we've answered all the questions that came in advance, and thank you all for those.
Yes, thank you so much for submitting questions.
And by the way, we encourage all of you to submit questions in advance, all of you who are, I forget what we call the level, but all of you patrons who are eligible to vote and submit questions in advance, we encourage you to do that. we make that a little bit of a perk for the...
Let me see here. Oh, here we go. I think we're coming back on. Hello, everyone.
Are we back?
Are we back? It's saying that it's connected, and it appears to be streaming again.
Let us know if you can see and hear us. Oh, we're back.
We apologize.
We came back just in time to say goodbye, right?
Where did we drop out?
Maybe we should start over.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our...
welcome. Show the aerial shot. No, are you still back in that?
Here we go.
Oh.
That's what we were trying to show.
All right. I think Gremlins came in here at the last minute. We were seeing the chat. Let me just go back in.
I swear we paid our Verizon bill.
Yeah, we paid it all right.
I have a feeling they bumped us off because we're the only people
Sorry
using
about
this tower.
that, and thank you for hanging in. So let me see if there were any other questions we missed. You're not going to do anything that's going to get us off again, are you?
No, I'm trying not to.
Yeah. If we go off again, it's his fault.
Don't blame me. Hey, look, I got us back on. What about some kudos?
All right, so let's hit a couple last things here. Richie said, I'm leaning towards a Relion lithium battery for my fifth wheel. The Relion reps told me that they're 100 amp HD and 300 amp HD batteries will still charge slowly, well below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, down into the teens.
Oh, yeah. Actually, we were just looking at
We
some
saw
info on
something
Reliant.
about that with Relion when we were researching today.
Yeah, it looks like they may have actually done a similar thing to Xantrix, which is to put a heating pad in there.
We think that might be what they did because I don't think lithium iron phosphate has changed, and I don't think it can be charged below freezing. I think
right.
We're,
So I
we're
think
guessing
they did the
that's what
same
they
thing.
did. So the Locks wished us and everyone else a great Christmas.
Thank you. Hope
I
everyone
said we
here
hope you had a
one.
great Christmas. And are we going to Quartzsite? We are probably not going to Quartzsite, even though we're just south of it. If we do, it will be to stop there for a night to dump our tanks, do laundry,
And head
fill
back
the
out into
fresh
the
tank,
desert.
and head north. We're probably heading to Havasu for a couple of weeks. If any of you are going to be in the Lake Havasu area in about 2 weeks, we're probably going to be there during the Escapers Bash. Although we are not going to the Bash, we're probably going because our friends Kyle and Olivia are speaking there, and our friends
Heath and Alyssa.
Heath and Alyssa are speaking there, and our friend Becky of Interstellar Orchard is speaking there, so we'll probably go to hang with them.
I'm going back to full screen so that people don't have to sit there and watch.
Yeah, you don't have to watch that.
Watch the desert spin by.
So, Happy New Year.
Yes.
Thank you. And John said, regarding the Newmar question earlier, there will be over 115 Newmar coaches at the gathering at Quartzsite in 3 weeks. I'll put in a good word for you. Thanks for the Q&A.
Thank you, John.
Maybe we'll come back, because after we're in Havasu, we're not sure where we're going. Morton's on the move. Our friends Tom and Caitlin are also going to be at the Escapers Bash. We were talking about maybe going to the American Girl Mine with them, stuff like that. And here's all the stuff about us not getting on. And by the way, you're right. Chris and Cherie would not have had this happen.
That's right. We should have had them here. They would have fixed it for us.
Whether their boat had
Lickety-split.
internet access or not, they would have gotten through this. Yeah, and we saw they're doing battle with midges. We were texting with them about an hour and a half, 2 hours before we got on this chat today.
Oh my gosh. I don't know how they're even still have
They
any hair
were
left
not.
in their heads.
They were not happy.
I do not blame them. Those midges
Yeah.
look obnoxious. I had never even heard of them here. I had heard of midges in Scotland. They're the biting kind.
Right, and the Locks mentioned Alyssa's pregnant. If you follow our Instagram feed, you'll know that we were with Heath and Alyssa just about 10 days or 2 weeks ago.
And this one specifically staged the shot with the margarita sampler tray right in front of Alyssa.
Yeah.
She did not imbibe any alcohol. She's being
We can
very protective.
attest to the fact that
Yes.
Alyssa
She's a good mom.
did not have anything to drink. So we are watching out for flash floods, Mike.
Yes. We're staying out of washes.
If you want to know what midges are, go to Technomatia's website, and you're going to hear plenty about midges.
Yes.
And Kirk, thank you so much for the nice comment. We are one of the things we're doing out here. We'll give you a little inside track. Our folks are all our most cherished and valued people who are here with us. We truly appreciate your support, and we are going to tell you that the filming for the RVers TV show that we will be hosting this year has begun, and we can say no more.
Well, after that little bomb.
But filming is underway, and we've been working with the producers. We are doing some of the shooting here, actually. I think you may see some scenes. We've been setting up shots for what's called B-roll to showcase things as other topics are being discussed. So look for that. One last thing before we go, I'd like to mention that if you would be so kind as to click the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this chat. It's always good to get some extra thumbs there. We
Gives us some extra cred with YouTube.
Oh, I never remembered to pause the playback.
If we go offline, it's his fault, and he's passing the blame on me.
I'm eating up bandwidth here. It was me. I forgot to do that right in the very beginning. So don't worry, we're not camped in a wash. We're on high ground. And we're safe.
Yes.
So we have no idea what's going to happen with the archived version of this. If this gets archived with a big break in the middle, we really apologize. I don't know if there's any way to avoid that.
We've never had that happen before, so we will check it out. We were doing a local recording during all of that as well, so if we need to, we can maybe put up a little snitch, but mostly what you missed was us sitting right here going, wait, are we still online? Are we offline? Yeah. Can anybody hear us?
And what we'll do also, if it turns out, we'll watch the archived version. If it turns out that's what happened, we will put a note in big letters in the post for anyone who comes in and says from, minute number whatever to minute number whatever, we were knocked offline. You could skip that part and come back. So let's hope. We're in uncharted territory.
That's right. This is new territory for us.
Right. Okay, anyway, I think we're all set. Thank you all everyone. So much for joining us.
We hope you found this useful.
We hope you have a happy new year. We will see you next month. We have no idea where we'll be. It will not be here because we'll have used up our 2 weeks by then.
We'll have used up all of our data.
Everybody have a great night. Again, don't forget to give a thumbs up before you leave. And have a great new year.
Yes.
We'll see you all hopefully on the road. If you're out this way, let us know where you are. Maybe we'll connect.
Drive safe, everyone.
He's going to push the button and say goodnight.
Good night, Gracie.
Good night.